Grace's 70th birthday was supposed to be a celebration. The mansion, perched on a snow-dusted Alaskan hill, sparkled with festive lights against the icy twilight. Champagne flowed, laughter echoed, and Grace, radiant in a deep blue silk gown, moved toward the grand staircase. But as her heel caught an uneven step, the world tilted, and she crashed to the floor. A sharp gasp sliced through the room. Beyoncé, the family's maid, sprang forward. At 30, she was a quiet force of efficiency and care. Her dark skin gleamed under the warm chandelier lights, and her practical outfit contrasted sharply with the glamorous chaos around her. She knelt beside Grace, feeling for broken bones, sensing that something was off beyond the obvious fall. Paramedics arrived, and Grace was swiftly taken to the hospital. Her leg was fractured, but as Beyoncé followed quietly, she caught a glimpse of Lola smirking from the corner. The friend who once laughed the loudest at Grace's jokes now had a calculating gleam in her eyes. Something about that smirk chilled Beyoncé's instincts. The doctors delivered the news. Grace would need a wheelchair for the foreseeable future. Her pride and independence, always her strongest armor, suddenly seemed fragile. While others murmured sympathetic words, Beyoncé's mind raced. She knew accidents didn't always happen by chance, especially when a greedy hand might be guiding them. Back at the mansion, the party guests had left, leaving a trail of forgotten champagne glasses and ribbons. Lola's gaze lingered on Grace's son, Richard, whispering something that made him laugh nervously. Beyoncé watched from the shadows, her intuition screaming that Lola's intentions were far from innocent. The game, it seemed, had only just begun. Beyoncé carefully examined the remains of Grace's last drink, noting the faint, unusual smell. Her heart thumped. Could it really be poison? Or something subtle enough to seem like a drunken mishap? The thought sent a chill through her, but also a spark. She wouldn't let a silent threat destroy this family. Not if she could stop it. Richard appeared, his tall frame tense as he spoke softly to his mother. "Mom, it's going to be okay," he said, though the worry in his eyes betrayed him. Grace smiled faintly, trying to hide the mix of pain and embarrassment. Beyoncé silently vowed she would protect them, even if it meant taking on the darkness that hid behind Lola's perfect smile. As night fell over the icy Alaskan landscape, Beyoncé looked out a frosted window, the northern lights casting an eerie glow over the mansion. In that moment, she understood. A friend's betrayal could be colder than the harshest winter, and she would need every ounce of courage and cunning to save the family she had come to love. The morning after the accident, the mansion was quiet. Snow drifted softly against the tall windows, muffling the sounds of the outside world. Grace, now in her wheelchair, sat by the fireplace wrapped in a cashmere throw. Beyoncé quietly poured tea, her sharp eyes scanning the room for any sign of danger. Something about the way Lola moved yesterday lingered in her mind. Too casual, too knowing, too sly. Richard entered, adjusting his suit, the worry etched across his handsome features. "Mom, how are you feeling?" he asked, kneeling beside her. Grace smiled faintly but avoided Lola's gaze, who was lounging elegantly nearby, flipping through a magazine with deliberate nonchalance. The tension in the room was palpable, though no one spoke it aloud. Beyoncé remembered the faint odor from Grace's drink and decided to investigate discreetly. She moved through the kitchen, checking glasses, leftover beverages, and even the ice bucket from the party. Her intuition told her something had been tampered with, but she needed proof, something undeniable to expose Lola without causing panic. Meanwhile, Lola leaned toward Richard, her voice silky. "You know, your mother is very lucky to have such a devoted son," she murmured, letting her words carry a subtle double meaning. Richard, still shaken by his mother's fall, nodded politely, unaware of the deeper intentions behind Lola's charm. Beyoncé caught the glint in Lola's eyes, calculation hidden behind feigned warmth. Beyoncé found a small residue at the bottom of one of Grace's glasses, a faint, almost undetectable powder. Her pulse quickened. If this was what she suspected, it wasn't just carelessness or alcohol. Someone had intentionally tried to harm Grace. She quietly bagged the evidence, making a mental note to consult her discreet ally, Tom, the family lawyer, later. The atmosphere grew tense as family staff began their morning routines. Martha, the elderly house manager, noticed Beyoncé's furtive behavior and gave a knowing nod. She had been loyal to Grace for decades and trusted Beyoncé's instincts. Even without words, an unspoken alliance formed between the two women, strength against the subtle manipulations of Lola. Later, as Grace rested, Lola approached, sitting too close, her perfume sharp and sweet, her words seemingly innocent. "I just want to help," she said. But Beyoncé, standing a step behind, felt the malicious undertone. Every gesture, every smile, every flick of her hair. By evening, the mansion felt like a chessboard. Every move mattered. Beyoncé moved like a shadow, observing, protecting, calculating. She knew Lola wouldn't stop. Her greed was relentless. And in the quiet Alaskan night, under the soft glow of northern lights peeking through the windows, the first threads of a dangerous game were being woven, with Grace's family caught at its center. Beyoncé sat at the edge of the grand Alaskan estate kitchen table, the faint residue from Grace's drink in a small evidence bag before her. The morning sun reflected off the polished marble countertops, but it did nothing to warm the chill that ran down her spine. She had to know exactly what had been in that drink, something subtle enough to look like a mistake, but deadly if left unchecked. Her phone buzzed, a message from Tom, the family lawyer. "Meet me in the library. Urgent." Beyoncé's heart skipped a beat. The library, lined with towering shelves of leather-bound books and dim golden lamps, was one of the quietest places in the mansion. She tucked the evidence into her coat and moved silently, careful not to alert anyone, especially Lola. Tom's expression was grave when she arrived. "Beyoncé, I've noticed some irregularities in the estate accounts," he whispered, leaning close. "And I've had a strange feeling about Lola for weeks. This fall might not be an accident." He handed her a tablet with bank transfers, sudden purchases, and subtle financial manipulations, all pointing to someone trying to edge closer to Grace's fortune. Beyoncé scanned the records, her mind racing. It wasn't just about the fall, it was about control. Lola had been plotting to manipulate Richard, to gain access to the family wealth by stealth and charm. And Grace, vulnerable in her wheelchair, was the perfect opportunity. The maid clenched her fists. She would not let greed destroy a family she had come to love. That evening, as the mansion's grand chandeliers flickered to life, Beyoncé moved carefully through the hallways, checking doors, locks, and hidden corners. Her senses sharpened. Lola's every step, every whispered word, every flicker of her eyes was calculated. The maid knew that if she misstepped, she could lose the only chance to protect Grace. Meanwhile, Lola prepared for her next move. Leaning against the grand staircase railing, she texted Richard casually, her words innocuous but loaded with subtle manipulation. "Let's discuss your mother's wishes tonight." Her plan was unfolding perfectly, or so she thought. Beyoncé, hidden nearby, saw the message flash and felt the storm of deceit tighten like a noose. Beyoncé returned to Grace's side that night, carrying the small evidence bag and a resolve she had never felt before. She whispered quietly, "We'll figure this out, ma'am. I promise." Grace, tired but trusting, nodded faintly, unaware of the full danger lurking behind Lola's charming facade. The tension hung heavy in the air, almost tangible, like the icy Alaskan wind outside. As the northern lights danced above the estate, Beyoncé finally understood the magnitude of what she was up against. One greedy woman, one fragile secret, and a family unaware of the threat closing in. She would need wit, courage, and secrecy. And most importantly, she would need to act before it was too late. The following morning, the mansion's crisp Alaskan light streamed through the windows. Lola, dressed in a fitted cream suit that made her look effortless and powerful, sauntered toward Richard in the study. "I was thinking about your mother's future," she said sweetly, letting her voice carry just enough innocence to disarm him. Richard, still shaken from his mother's fall, didn't notice the glimmer of calculation behind her eyes. Beyoncé, hidden behind a tall bookshelf, observed quietly. Her sharp eyes followed every subtle movement, every slight gesture. Lola's plan was clear: charm Richard, get close, manipulate, and gain access to the family wealth. But Beyoncé wasn't about to let that happen. Her heart pounded, adrenaline sharp and steady, as she began formulating a counterplan in silence. Lola continued, leaning closer to Richard, lowering her voice. I know how overwhelming it must be, taking care of your mother and managing the estate. Maybe I can help even guide you. Richard's face showed confusion mixed with gratitude, unaware that the guidance Lola offered was a trap disguised as kindness. Beyoncé moved silently to intercept any possible opportunity Lola might exploit. She retrieved hidden security footage from the previous night, examining the patterns, the subtle hand movements, and even the positioning of objects near Grace's drinks. Every detail could be a clue, and she knew it could expose Lola's intentions before Richard was too deeply entangled. Meanwhile, Lola lingered in the study, subtly leaving traces of her influence. A casually dropped magazine on Richard's desk, a faintly suggestive comment about Grace's will, a glance meant to linger. Every move was deliberate, calculated, and designed to create an emotional dependency that would later serve her ambition. Beyoncé quietly intercepted one of Lola's notes before Richard could see it. It was innocuous at first glance, just a simple suggestion about estate management. But the hidden meaning was clear. Lola was trying to manipulate her emotions and, indirectly, Grace's estate. Beyoncé's lips pressed into a thin line. She would need evidence, confrontation, and strategy, all while keeping Richard protected from Lola's charm. By midday, the mansion buzzed with routine, cleaning, staff movement, maintenance, but the invisible tension between the women was palpable. Every glance, every interaction, was a silent battle. Beyoncé's mind raced. If Lola succeeded in ensnaring Richard's trust, Grace's safety and the estate's future could be in jeopardy. And she would not allow that. As the northern Alaskan night settled outside, the first real confrontation loomed. Lola had set the pieces, and now it was up to Beyoncé to anticipate, intercept, and outsmart her. Every shadow in the mansion seemed alive, every whisper carried weight, and every choice could tip the delicate balance between betrayal and salvation. The morning sun glinted off the icy Alaskan landscape as Grace wheeled herself into the grand dining room. Today, the family would gather to discuss her care, her estate, and the growing tension surrounding her accident. The room smelled faintly of coffee and cinnamon pastries, but the warmth was a stark contrast to the chill in the air, both outside and inside. Richard, sitting at the head of the table, looked tense. Lola, ever composed, took the seat beside him, her presence smooth and calculated. Martha and Tom were strategically positioned across from them. Beyoncé stood discreetly at the back, a silent sentinel, her eyes scanning every face, noting every subtle shift in expression. Grace cleared her throat. "We need to discuss the future," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the wheelchair. "I want everyone's input, but I expect honesty." Her gaze swept across the table, pausing briefly on Lola, who offered a serene smile that didn't reach her eyes. Beyoncé felt the tension spike, the calm before a storm. Lola began gently, her words like silk wrapping a hidden blade. "Of course, Grace. I just want what's best for everyone. Perhaps we should discuss management strategies for the estate and how Richard can balance work and your care." Her smile was warm, but her eyes flicked briefly to Richard, hinting at her subtle manipulation. Tom interjected cautiously. "It's wise to consider the estate, but let's also remember that recent incidents require discretion. There are potential threats we need to be aware of." His gaze lingered on Lola, and though polite, his suspicion was clear. Beyoncé's eyes narrowed. Tom had noticed, but would he act? Richard looked between his mother, Lola, and Tom, confusion clouding his features. "I just want to do what's right for Mom," he said quietly, frustration evident. Beyoncé stepped closer, subtly leaning in toward Grace to whisper reassurance. "I'm watching, ma'am. I won't let her get too close." Grace's faint nod told her she understood. The game had already begun. The discussion continued, carefully measured words masking the undercurrents of manipulation and suspicion. Every suggestion from Lola was layered, every observation from Tom cautious, every glance from Beyoncé protective. The mansion, grand and beautiful, suddenly felt like a battlefield, its walls holding secrets, and every person a potential player or pawn. By the meeting's end, no resolutions had been reached, but lines had been drawn. Grace knew she could trust Tom. Richard had begun to question Lola, and Beyoncé, quietly observing every move, realized that the real battle for the family's safety had just begun. Outside, the Alaskan snowstorm began to rise, swirling against the mansion windows, as if mirroring the storm brewing within. After the family meeting, the mansion felt heavy with unspoken tension. The grand halls echoed faintly with the wind against the icy Alaskan walls. Beyoncé retreated to the servants' quarters, closing the door softly behind her. Her mind raced. Lola's manipulation of Richard was already in motion, and Grace's vulnerability made the stakes dangerously high. She needed a plan, one precise enough to protect the family, but subtle enough to remain unseen. Beyoncé pulled out a small notebook and began mapping everything: Lola's known habits, her interactions with Richard, the timing of Grace's fall, and the suspicious residue in the champagne glass. Each detail became a thread, and in her mind, she started weaving them into a protective web. Every step had to anticipate Lola's next move. She decided to enlist a subtle ally, Martha, the loyal house manager. Quiet but fiercely protective, Martha knew every hidden corner of the mansion and every family secret. Together, they could monitor Lola's actions, intercept her subtle manipulations, and gather evidence without alerting anyone. The partnership was risky, but necessary. Beyoncé also planned to use technology. Security footage, discreetly recorded conversations, and patterns of movement throughout the mansion could all serve as proof of Lola's schemes. Every room, every corner of the Alaskan estate became part of her invisible map, a network to keep Grace and the family safe without confrontation for now. Meanwhile, Lola continued her casual manipulation, unaware that someone was watching. Every smile, every flirty comment to Richard, every seemingly innocent suggestion about estate management was being catalogued by Beyoncé. Each interaction became a piece of a puzzle, each smile a trap that needed to be disarmed. Beyoncé knew that direct confrontation wasn't an option. Not yet. Lola thrived on charm, subtlety, and deception. Instead, Beyoncé would operate like a shadow, anticipating moves, redirecting attention, and collecting evidence. Every action had to protect Grace and buy time until the truth could be revealed. That night, she met with Martha in the library, hushed voices echoing faintly between tall shelves. "We need to monitor everything," Beyoncé whispered. "Lola's not just ambitious, she's dangerous. If we don't act carefully, she could ruin the family." Martha nodded, her eyes reflecting decades of loyalty and determination. They were ready to fight invisibly, to defend Grace without alerting the enemy. As the northern lights shimmered across the Alaskan sky outside, Beyoncé stood at the window, feeling the weight of the night pressing against her. The mansion, silent yet alive with unseen tension, held its breath. Every move, every whisper, every glance could change the outcome. And Beyoncé, once a quiet servant, now held the power to protect a billionaire's legacy and the family she had grown to love. It was late evening, and the mansion was cloaked in a quiet Alaskan darkness. Snowflakes scraped against the windows, and the northern lights painted eerie streaks across the sky. Beyoncé moved silently along the hallway outside Grace's room, checking on hidden security monitors and reviewing Lola's movements. Each step was deliberate, careful. Any wrong move could reveal her plan. Suddenly, a shadow shifted behind a door. Lola's laugh, soft but dangerous, echoed faintly down the corridor. Beyoncé froze, heart pounding. Lola had been closer than expected, her presence almost unnoticed. For a moment, It felt as if the mansion itself had closed in around her, every ornate fixture a silent witness to the danger. Beyoncé ducked behind a tall velvet curtain, pressing her back against the wall. Lola paused, glancing suspiciously toward the hall, her instincts sharp. The maid's pulse raced as Lola's heels clicked softly on the polished floors, moving closer, closer until finally, she turned and left, unaware of the narrow escape. Breathing heavily, Beyoncé knew this close call was a warning. Lola was sharper, more observant than she had imagined. If she didn't step up her strategy, the subtle surveillance she had relied on wouldn't be enough. Every plan, every precaution had to be faster, smarter, invisible. She retreated to the security room, her mind racing. Screens showed Lola's movements throughout the mansion, graceful gestures, strategic placement near Richard, subtle shifts of objects near Grace's wheelchair. Each action confirmed what Beyoncé already suspected. Lola wasn't just ambitious. She was dangerous, meticulous, and unpredictable. Beyoncé's phone buzzed, a quiet message from Martha. "Lola is asking about you. Be careful." Her stomach tightened. The loyal house manager's instincts were always sharp. This wasn't just a threat to the estate. It was a threat to her, to Grace, and to the fragile balance keeping Lola at bay. Every step she took had to be precise. That night, as the mansion settled under the frozen Alaskan sky, Beyoncé devised her next move. If Lola got too close, too suspicious, all her careful planning could unravel. She needed decoys, diversions, and traps of observation that could expose Lola without a confrontation. The game was no longer just about observation, it was about survival, timing, and outsmarting a predator in plain sight. By the time the northern lights faded behind heavy clouds, Beyoncé had a renewed sense of purpose. Lola had almost discovered her investigation, but the maid had survived, hidden, and learned. Every shadow, every corridor, every flicker of light became a tool in her plan. The closer the danger, the sharper her resolve. Grace's family depended on her now more than ever. Beyoncé moved quietly through the mansion's private archives, a room few ever entered. The walls were lined with shelves of leather-bound ledgers, dusty folders, and safes concealed behind ornate panels. The faint scent of old paper and polished wood filled the air. Her mission: uncover the secrets of Grace's estate before Lola could exploit them. She began with the estate's financial records, scanning accounts, trusts, and wills. Each document revealed hidden clauses, provisions Grace had established long ago to protect her family. Some of them even gave control in the event of incapacitation, subtly designed to prevent manipulation. But hidden within these safeguards were loopholes. A clever mind could exploit them, and Beyoncé suspected Lola was already thinking along those lines. Beyoncé discovered a set of letters tucked away in an old safe, detailing past family agreements and trust arrangements. Some clauses were outdated, but others had been secretly updated by Grace's lawyer, Tom, for added protection. The more she read, the more she realized that knowledge was the true weapon in this mansion. Whoever understood the estate's secrets could control not just finances, but loyalty, influence, and destiny. Her investigation revealed one particularly delicate document, a clause that required unanimous family approval for major estate decisions. It meant that Lola's influence over Richard alone wasn't enough. Beyoncé's lips pressed into a thin line. If she could ensure this clause remained enforced, Lola's scheme could be derailed without confrontation. But timing would be critical. While scanning the records, Beyoncé also discovered coded entries in Grace's personal ledger, notations of investments, secret accounts, and a small contingency fund reserved for emergencies. Whoever knew how to interpret these could manipulate outcomes without anyone noticing. Beyoncé's pulse quickened. She realized she now held not just evidence against Lola, but the key to protecting Grace's entire legacy. Meanwhile, Lola continued her subtle manipulation, unaware that Beyoncé had already begun unraveling the threads of her plan. Every calculated smile, every gentle nudge toward Richard, every casual suggestion about estate management was catalogued by the maid. Each interaction, once a potential threat, became ammunition to protect Grace. By nightfall, Beyoncé had pieced together a detailed map of the estate's secrets, financial loopholes, hidden clauses, and potential vulnerabilities. She could anticipate Lola's moves before they happened, intercept manipulations, and quietly safeguard Grace's interests. The mansion, grand and imposing, was no longer just a home. It was a chessboard, and every move mattered. As the northern lights shimmered faintly outside, Beyoncé leaned against the frosted window, a quiet smile crossing her face. For the first time, she felt a sense of control amidst the chaos. She had uncovered the secrets that could protect the family. Now, it was a matter of strategy, patience, and timing. Lola's ambition had met its match. Beyoncé was ready. Richard sat alone in the study, the morning Alaskan light spilling over mahogany shelves. His mind was a storm. Something about Lola's recent behavior didn't sit right. Her smiles felt calculated, her advice felt too convenient, too perfectly timed. He rubbed his temples, trying to separate intuition from paranoia, unaware that Beyoncé had been quietly watching, waiting for the right moment to guide him. Lola entered the room, her presence smooth and confident. "Richard, I thought you might need help reviewing some of your mother's documents," she said, carrying a neatly organized folder. Her voice was honeyed, but her eyes flicked subtly toward a hidden ledger on the desk. Richard noticed the glance, but brushed it off, feeling the first stirrings of doubt about her intentions. Richard tried to focus, flipping through papers, but every time he looked at Lola, a flicker of unease rose. Her questions were too pointed, her comments too leading. Something didn't add up, but he couldn't place it. Meanwhile, Beyoncé quietly adjusted the security feed from a corner, ensuring every subtle move Lola made was recorded, ready to reveal the truth when the time was right. As Lola spoke about estate management, Richard's mind raced. Why did she seem so intent on controlling his decisions? Was it concern or manipulation? He glanced at the ledger again, noticing an entry that didn't align with previous instructions from Grace. The doubt began to take root, and with it, the realization that perhaps he had been blinded by charm. Beyoncé observed every micro-expression, every flick of the eyes, every slight hesitation. She knew Richard needed subtle guidance, not confrontation. One gentle nudge, one piece of evidence revealed at the right moment, could shift his trust away from Lola and toward the truth. Timing was everything, and she had calculated the perfect window. Later that evening, Richard confronted a minor inconsistency in the estate documents. "Mom wrote these instructions herself," he murmured, staring at a page. "Some of this doesn't match what Lola said." His voice wavered, tinged with confusion and suspicion. Beyoncé silently took note. His awareness was growing, and soon, he would see the truth fully. Beyoncé knew she had to act carefully. A wrong move, a premature reveal, could make Richard retreat into denial or worse, leave him vulnerable to Lola's charm. She whispered a quick instruction to Martha through a discreet phone. "Prepare evidence for tomorrow. Timing is critical." Their alliance moved like clockwork, quiet and invisible, preparing to expose Lola without confrontation. By nightfall, Richard's confusion had turned into quiet determination. He didn't yet know the full extent of Lola's deceit, but his instincts were waking. And somewhere in the shadows, Beyoncé's watchful eyes ensured that when he finally confronted the truth, it would be with proof, protection, and a plan, just as Grace had entrusted her to do. The mansion was quiet, cloaked in the icy Alaskan night. Snow swirled violently outside the large windows, brushing against the tall, elegant walls. Inside, Beyoncé moved silently through the corridors, carefully placing subtle cues to guide Richard's attention toward inconsistencies in Lola's stories. Tonight, the first trap would be set, a trap designed to expose deceit without Lola realizing she was being caught. Richard sat in his study, reviewing documents with furrowed brows. Beyoncé had subtly left certain papers in plain view, financial entries, memos, and letters that contradicted Lola's recent statements. As Richard flipped through them, his suspicion grew. He glanced toward Lola, who was seated in the adjoining room, oblivious to the fact that her manipulations were about to be revealed. Lola approached, sensing the moment was right to push her influence. "Richard, I thought you might need guidance on these documents," she said smoothly, stepping closer. Her hands rested lightly on the desk, but her eyes flicked toward the papers that Beyoncé had strategically left. Richard caught the subtle contradiction and felt a spark of realization. Something wasn't right. Richard's voice hardened slightly. "Lola, some of these instructions don't match what you said earlier." A moment of tension froze the room. Lola's calm facade flickered for a fraction of a second, a subtle sign that her carefully constructed deception was under threat. Beyoncé, watching from the shadows, felt a rush of satisfaction. The trap had worked. Lola recovered quickly, her voice smooth again, but the seed of doubt had been planted. She subtly shifted her stance, adjusting her words, trying to regain control. But Richard's eyes were sharper now, questioning, wary. Every sentence she spoke was being weighed against the documents on the desk, every gesture scrutinized. Beyoncé moved quietly to reinforce the trap. A few more documents, carefully highlighted and placed in Richard's line of sight, confirmed discrepancies in Lola's story. Martha had also been alerted, ready to provide support if the confrontation escalated. Every move was precise, invisible, and carefully timed. By the end of the night, Richard's confusion had turned into cautious clarity. He didn't have the full picture yet, but he could sense the truth lurking just beneath Lola's polished exterior. Lola, unaware of the subtle orchestration around her, left the study feeling victorious, oblivious that her first manipulation had been thwarted. Outside, the Alaskan storm raged, lightning illuminating the snow-covered estate. Inside, a silent battle of wits was unfolding, and Beyoncé had taken the first victory. The trap had worked, Richard's trust in Lola had begun to waver, and the game had entered a new, dangerous phase. Every move from here on would have consequences for loyalty, for love, and for the future of Grace's family. The morning sun barely penetrated the thick Alaskan clouds, casting a gray glow over the mansion. Lola sat in the grand living room, swirling a glass of untouched wine. Her sharp eyes followed Richard from a distance, noting the way he hesitated before answering her questions. Something wasn't right. Her first instinct, subtle, calculated, dangerous, told her that her manipulation had been noticed. Beyoncé, hidden behind a tall decorative screen, observed silently. Lola's first flicker of suspicion had appeared, but she didn't know the source. The young maid's heart pounded. Lola was clever, and if she discovered the investigation, the game could turn deadly. Every move now had to be measured, every step invisible, every glance calculated. Lola stood abruptly, her instincts sharpening. She approached Richard, casually referencing the documents from the previous night. "I noticed you were reviewing the papers again," she said lightly, but the flicker of doubt in her eyes betrayed her awareness. She had been caught off guard, and now she was recalculating, considering every possible angle to regain control. Richard, growing more confident, replied cautiously, "I just want to make sure everything matches what Mom intended." His words carried subtle firmness. Lola's smile remained, but it was thinner now, more measured. Beyoncé noted the shift. The first cracks were appearing in Lola's composure, and the psychological advantage was moving slowly, but surely toward Grace's side. Beyoncé retreated to the security room to review footage from the previous night. Lola's movements had changed, more cautious, more aware of unseen eyes. Every hesitation, every glance toward hallways or locked doors indicated that suspicion had begun to creep into her mind. The trap had worked, but now the real challenge had begun, keeping Lola unaware of who was orchestrating the countermeasures. Martha joined Beyoncé quietly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "She's noticing, isn't she?" she whispered. Beyoncé nodded subtly. Lola's suspicion meant the stakes were higher, but it also meant their strategy was effective. The house was now a chessboard, and every person a piece in the unfolding battle for truth, loyalty, and the future of Grace's estate. Outside, the Alaskan wind howled, rattling the mansion windows. Inside, the air was heavy with unspoken tension. Lola moved through the halls with newfound caution, her charm still intact but her confidence shaken. Beyoncé watched, calculating, ready to adjust the strategy at a moment's notice. The first trap had worked, but the next phase of the battle would require even more precision. By nightfall, Beyoncé knew one thing clearly. Lola was beginning to realize that her control over Richard and the family was slipping. But suspicion alone wouldn't stop her. She would plan her next move, and it would be dangerous. The mansion, silent yet alive with tension, held its breath. Every whisper, every step, every shadow mattered now. The battle for Grace's safety and the family's future had entered its most dangerous phase yet. The mansion seemed quieter than usual, but the shadows in the hallways were deceptive. Lola moved silently, her heels muted against the polished floors. She had begun her own subtle investigation, testing Richard, probing for weaknesses, and planting seeds of doubt. Her every step was deliberate, like a predator circling prey. Beyoncé, hidden behind a tall velvet curtain near the staircase, observed every motion. Her pulse was steady, her senses sharp. Lola was clever, but she underestimated Beyoncé's knowledge of the mansion's secret corners. Every shadow, every hallway, every flickering light became a tool in the maid's strategy to anticipate Lola's moves before they could take effect. Lola paused at the entrance to Richard's study, glancing around as if sensing something amiss. She leaned casually against the doorway, her smile controlled, her eyes scanning for weaknesses. In her mind, she was plotting her next move, how to regain influence, how to manipulate Richard further, and how to bypass the subtle traps she felt lurking in the mansion. Beyoncé quietly moved along a hidden corridor to reposition herself, ensuring she remained unseen. Every step was calculated to avoid detection, every breath controlled. She had learned that Lola's instincts were sharp, any misstep could blow her cover. In this silent battle, invisibility was her most powerful weapon. Meanwhile, Richard was unaware of the invisible war playing out around him. He focused on documents and memos, unaware that every shadow contained a watchful eye. Beyoncé's strategy wasn't just to observe, it was to manipulate the environment so that Richard would naturally notice Lola's discrepancies without realizing he was being guided. Suddenly, a loud clatter echoed from the hallway, a tray knocked over by Lola's nervous attempt to retrieve it. Her confidence faltered for a fraction of a second. Beyoncé, observing from the shadows, knew this small slip was a sign. Lola's tension was growing. Every subtle mistake could now be used strategically to protect Grace and expose deception. The night deepened, and the mansion seemed alive with silent observation. Every door, every corridor, every flickering light carried potential clues. Beyoncé mapped the shadows, anticipating Lola's next move while preparing subtle diversions. The mansion itself became a silent battlefield, with invisible lines drawn between truth and deception, loyalty and ambition. By midnight, it was clear to Beyoncé that the stakes had risen. Lola's suspicion was no longer passive, it was active, dangerous. But every move she made now could be anticipated. With careful timing, the maid could turn every shadow in the mansion into an ally, every hallway into a trap, and every whisper into evidence. The game of deception had entered its most critical stage yet. Beyoncé moved quietly into the mansion's private archive, a room thick with dust and secrets. The faint scent of old paper and polished would fill the air. Her eyes scanned every shelf, every ledger, every folder. She knew the evidence she needed existed somewhere in the maze of paperwork and hidden safes, but Lola had covered her tracks carefully. It was a puzzle, and Beyoncé was determined to solve it. Hours passed as she sifted through documents, uncovering subtle signs of tampering. Certain entries in Grace's financial ledgers had been altered, small discrepancies that, to an untrained eye, might appear innocent. But Beyoncé's sharp mind caught them immediately. These were Lola's fingerprints, hidden behind layers of charm and subtle manipulation. Hidden among the mundane paperwork, Beyoncé discovered a folder with the words, "Contingency, Family Security," written in Grace's precise handwriting. Inside were letters, receipts, and photographs that proved intentional sabotage, details that tied Lola to the spiked drink and manipulations targeting Grace's estate. Her eyes widened slightly. This was the proof she needed. Beyoncé realized the evidence had to be secured. Lola couldn't know it existed. Using her knowledge of the mansion's hidden compartments, she concealed the folder in a secret panel behind a bookshelf, an area only she and Martha knew about. The evidence would remain untouched until the perfect moment to reveal it arrived. Martha, ever loyal, assisted discreetly. Together, they ensured the folder was invisible to anyone searching casually. The mansion itself became their ally, a labyrinth of secrets protecting the truth. Every corridor, every room, every shadow now served a purpose beyond mere decor. It was a shield, a trap, and a tool in their unfolding strategy. Beyoncé took a moment to study Lola's latest movements on the security monitors. The woman was growing more cautious, more paranoid, unaware that her own actions were being documented. Each gesture, each smile, each attempt at subtle influence was now a piece of undeniable proof, hidden safely away, waiting for the right moment to dismantle her carefully built deception. The weight of the night pressed down as snowstorm winds rattled the mansion windows. Beyoncé felt a surge of purpose. The evidence was hidden, secure, and capable of exposing Lola completely. But timing was everything. One wrong move, one premature reveal, and the balance could tip dangerously. She had to remain patient, precise, and invisible. By the time the northern lights faded, Beyoncé had planned her next moves. The evidence was hidden. Richard was growing suspicious, and Lola's tension was escalating. The mansion was no longer just a home, it was a battleground, and Beyoncé had claimed the first decisive advantage. The game was far from over, but the path to protecting Grace and exposing Lola had begun. Richard sat alone in the study, the flickering fire casting warm light across his worried face. He replayed the events of the past days in his mind, the subtle contradictions in Lola's words, the unusual placement of documents, the faint unease he felt but could never name. Slowly, pieces began to align. Something was wrong. Very wrong. He noticed a ledger on the desk that he hadn't studied closely before. The numbers didn't match Lola's explanations. His pulse quickened. A creeping sense of betrayal started to form in his mind. Someone was manipulating him, guiding his choices in subtle ways. But who? And why? The question gnawed at him relentlessly. Beyoncé, hidden in the shadows of the hall, watched silently as the realization began to dawn. Richard's instincts were sharp, his mind piecing together clues without her interference. She smiled faintly. Her plan was working. He was beginning to see the cracks in Lola's charm, the subtle lies that had gone unnoticed for so long. Richard's thoughts shifted to the recent incidents, the fall that left Grace in a wheelchair, the suspicious accident during the birthday party, the spiked drink. Slowly, horrifying connections emerged. Lola's motives became clearer. Greed, ambition, manipulation, all masked by smiles and flattery. Rage and fear mingled in his chest. A soft movement from the shadows made him glance up. His eyes, sharp now, caught the faint outline of Beyoncé observing him. Recognition flickered, though he did not yet understand her role. Something about her calm, watchful presence instilled trust, a silent reassurance that not everything was lost. She was the unseen protector, guiding him toward the truth. Richard began cross-referencing documents, noticing subtle manipulations and small lies that pointed toward Lola's deception. He felt a mix of disbelief and clarity. Every charming word she had spoken, every casual suggestion she had made, now felt calculated, premeditated. He realized that the woman he had trusted most was the very person orchestrating Grace's downfall. Beyoncé whispered a quick note to Martha. He's seeing it now. Prepare for the reveal. Outside the study, the mansion seemed to hold its breath. Every shadow, every corridor, every creak in the floorboards carried potential danger. But Richard's realization was the turning point. They had gained the psychological upper hand, and the next phase of the plan could begin. By midnight, Richard sat back in his chair, his mind racing. The truth was becoming undeniable. Lola's manipulation had been extensive, but now he could see the pattern, the deceit, and the danger she posed. And somewhere, in the shadows, Beyoncé smiled faintly. The pieces were aligning. The family's safety and Grace's legacy was within reach. The mansion felt unusually still that morning, as if the walls themselves held their breath. Richard stood near the grand staircase, documents in hand, his jaw tight with restrained anger. He had pieced together Lola's manipulations, and for the first time, he felt the power of knowledge on his side. The woman who had charmed and deceived him for weeks would now face the consequences. Lola entered the room, unaware that the tide was turning. Her smile, once confident and effortless, faltered slightly as Richard's steady gaze met hers. "Richard, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice honeyed but tinged with unease. She tried to maintain control, but the subtle shift in his posture told her that something had changed. Richard's voice was calm, but edged with authority. "I've been reviewing the documents, the discrepancies, the events surrounding Mom's accident," he said slowly, letting each word land. Lola's eyes widened slightly. She had been confident in her manipulations, but Richard's sudden awareness threatened to unravel everything she had carefully built. Beyoncé, hidden behind a screen in the corner, watched with steady focus. The confrontation had begun exactly as she had planned, subtle, psychological, and precise. She knew that revealing evidence too early could provoke a dangerous reaction from Lola, so patience remained crucial. Every gesture, every hesitation, was being monitored. Lola recovered her composure, leaning slightly toward Richard with feigned innocence. "Richard, I'm only trying to help your mother's estate," she said, voice smooth but eyes flickering with unease. He didn't flinch. Every lie she told, every charm she deployed, only strengthened his resolve. He had seen through the veil, and he would no longer be manipulated. Richard placed the documents on the desk, letting the evidence speak without accusation. The subtle inconsistencies, the altered entries, the letters hidden in the mansion, all pointed toward her deceit. Lola's carefully constructed web began to crumble under the weight of facts she couldn't deny, and her eyes betrayed the first hint of panic. Beyoncé quietly signaled to Martha. The evidence was ready for the next phase. Lola's panic was growing, but the maid's invisible hand ensured the family's safety remained intact. Every document, every photograph, every ledger entry had been strategically positioned to dismantle Lola's narrative without direct confrontation. Yet, the Alaskan storm raged outside, snow swirling against the mansion windows, reflecting the tension inside. Lola's mask of confidence had slipped, revealing the sharp edges of desperation. Richard's realization had triggered the first true confrontation, but the battle was far from over. Shadows, secrets, and strategy would define the next steps. In that frozen, elegant mansion, the war for truth, loyalty, and Grace's legacy had truly begun. The mansion was eerily silent, the storm outside muffling all other sounds. Lola sat at the grand dining table, her hands tightly clasped, eyes darting to Richard as he carefully reviewed the documents. For the first time, uncertainty crept into her calculated composure. She realized she had underestimated him, and the invisible force guiding him. Richard's voice was steady but firm. "I've gone through every ledger, every note, and every instruction from Mom. Everything points to inconsistencies. And you, Lola, seem to be at the center of it all." Each word landed like a hammer, shaking Lola's confidence. Lola's mind raced. She had expected charm and subtle influence to control him, but Richard was seeing through her facade. The first crack in her armor appeared, a micro-expression, a fleeting flash of fear she couldn't fully suppress. Beyoncé, hidden nearby, caught it instantly. The psychological advantage was shifting. Beyoncé had anticipated this moment. She had subtly placed additional documents in Richard's view, emails, letters, and photos that tied Lola to Grace's spiked drink and her attempts to manipulate the family. Richard's eyes widened as he began connecting the dots. The first true crack in Lola's strategy had appeared. Lola's smile faltered, her attempts at feigned innocence becoming strained. "Richard, I don't know what you mean," she said, voice tight, betraying her panic. Her mind scrambled for a plausible explanation, but none existed. The cracks were spreading, and she could feel control slipping through her fingers. Richard leaned slightly forward, his voice calm but unforgiving. "I trusted you, Lola. I allowed you clothes, but now I see the truth. Every manipulation, every lie, it ends here." The weight of his realization pressed against her, and the first visible signs of fear, desperation, and anger flickered across Lola's features. Beyoncé whispered to Martha through a hidden earpiece, "Prepare the evidence. He's ready to see it." The moment had come to escalate the psychological confrontation with proof that would leave Lola exposed and defenseless. Every move had been carefully orchestrated to protect Grace and the family, and the first crack in Lola's armor had made the reveal inevitable. Outside, the storm raged against the mansion, as if nature itself was echoing the tension inside. Lola's strategy was failing, her control unraveling, and Richard was beginning to reclaim authority over the estate. Shadows, secrets, and evidence were converging, and the first true victory for Grace's legacy and for Beyoncé's careful orchestration was about to emerge. The mansion seemed to hold its breath as Richard, guided by intuition and subtle nudges from Beyoncé, reached for a hidden compartment in the study. He pulled out the folder labeled Contingency, Family Security. Every paper, photograph, and letter inside told a story. Proof of Lola's calculated schemes, from the spiked drink to the manipulations aimed at Grace's estate. Lola froze, realizing instantly what he had found. Her carefully constructed facade of charm and control shattered in an instant. Her eyes widened, panic replacing confidence. Richard held the folder steady, letting the evidence speak for itself, letters, photographs, and ledger discrepancies that tied her directly to every act of sabotage. Richard laid the evidence on the desk, spreading it before her. All of this proves it," he said, voice calm but unyielding. "Every lie, every attempt to manipulate Mom, to control this family, it ends now." Lola's lips trembled, but no words came. She could no longer deny the facts staring her in the face. Beyoncé stepped from the shadows, her presence calm but authoritative. "We've kept everything safe," she said softly, her voice carrying quiet power. "The truth is here. Grace's family deserves honesty and protection." Lola's gaze flicked between Richard and Beyoncé, realization dawning that she had been outmaneuvered, unseen, by the very people she had underestimated. Lola's attempts to regain control faltered completely. Her voice shook as she tried to explain, to manipulate, to charm, but every argument crumbled in the face of concrete proof. Richard, now fully aware, ignored her words, focusing instead on the evidence before him. The first decisive victory in the psychological battle had been won. Martha entered quietly, carrying additional documents that reinforced the folder's contents. Together, Beyoncé and Martha had orchestrated a meticulous reveal, every step calculated, every piece of evidence timed perfectly. Lola's schemes had been exposed without a single confrontation that risked Grace's safety. The mansion seemed to pulse with tension, relief, and quiet triumph. Richard's gaze hardened, not with anger, but with clarity. "You underestimated us," he said. "And now your plans are finished." Lola slumped in her chair, the first real defeat in her life apparent in her trembling hands. Outside, the Alaskan snowstorm continued, but inside the mansion, the storm of deceit had finally been quelled. Beyoncé quietly watched, satisfied but alert. The evidence had been revealed, Lola had been exposed, and Grace's family was safe. But the work wasn't finished. Richard now had to decide how to protect his mother and rebuild trust. The mansion, once a silent battlefield of shadows and deceit, had become a stage for clarity, justice, and the first step toward healing. Lola's hands trembled as she watched Richard and Beyoncé quietly organizing the revealed evidence. Her composure, once flawless, had crumbled completely. Yet, deep inside, a final spark of ambition ignited. She wasn't done. If she could manipulate even a single decision, she could salvage her plans, or at least inflict chaos before defeat. She stormed toward the grand staircase, forcing a confident stride. "Richard, you don't understand. Everything I did was for the family," she declared, voice sharp and trembling. But her words fell flat. He looked at her with steady eyes, recognizing the desperation behind the charm. Every attempt to manipulate him now felt hollow and transparent. Beyoncé anticipated the move, her body poised but unseen in the hallway shadows. She knew Lola's desperation made her dangerous. The woman might try to flee, destroy evidence, or even manipulate Grace herself. Every corridor, every secret passage, and every hidden camera became a safeguard. The mansion was ready. Lola's final gambit was subtle yet audacious. She attempted to appeal to Richard's emotions, painting herself as a loyal ally, a misunderstood helper. "Richard, think of your mother, your family. Don't let this ruin everything," she pleaded. But Richard's resolve, sharpened by evidence and guided by Beyoncé, remained unshaken. He had seen through the lies, and empathy could no longer override truth. Her eyes darted toward the folder, the very proof of her manipulation, but she dared not touch it. The evidence was untouchable, secured by Beyoncé's meticulous planning. The mansion, which had witnessed her schemes, now stood as a fortress for truth. Every hallway, every shadow, every hidden nook reinforced the inevitability of her defeat. Beyoncé moved subtly closer, ensuring Lola could not escape the room without being noticed. "It's over," she said softly, voice calm but carrying authority. "There's nowhere to hide." Lola's breathing grew shallow. The last vestiges of her control slipped away. She realized she had lost, not because of Richard's strength, but because she had underestimated the quiet power of observation, loyalty, and precision. The storm outside mirrored the tension inside. Lola's last attempt had failed, and she slumped into a chair, defeated and powerless. Richard, holding the evidence, finally exhaled. The mansion, silent but alive with the echoes of deception and strategy, had seen the final act of a battle fought in shadows and whispered moves. Beyoncé glanced at Richard and Martha, a faint smile of satisfaction on her face. The family was safe, the schemes exposed, and the legacy of Grace protected. The mansion, once a battlefield of deceit, had become a place of restored order. And as the northern lights shimmered faintly outside, the quiet heroes, loyal, smart, and determined, had claimed the victory without a single overt confrontation. The storm had passed, leaving the Alaskan landscape blanketed in pristine snow. Inside the mansion, a sense of calm replaced the tension that had gripped the family for weeks. Richard sat beside his mother, Grace, who was now settled comfortably in her wheelchair, wrapped in a warm blanket. For the first time since the accident, genuine peace filled the room. Grace smiled weakly but genuinely, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Richard, I knew you'd see the truth," she said softly. Her trust in her son had never wavered, but the ordeal had shaken her. Richard took her hand gently, a quiet reassurance that she was safe and that her legacy was protected. Beyoncé quietly entered the room, carrying a tray of tea. She had been the silent protector through every twist and turn, ensuring that the family remained safe without ever drawing attention to herself. Grace's eyes softened when she saw her. "Beyoncé, I don't know what we would have done without you," she whispered. Richard glanced at Beyoncé with respect and relief. "You were amazing," he said quietly. "You saved this family without anyone knowing until the right moment." Beyoncé simply nodded, her satisfaction quiet but deep. Her mission had been accomplished, and the family she cared for was finally safe. Martha joined them, placing documents back in order and smiling softly. "We've endured a lot," she said, "but trust, loyalty, and patience have brought us through. This house, this family is stronger now." Grace's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. Even in the shadow of betrayal, love and vigilance had preserved what mattered most. Outside, the northern lights shimmered across the sky, casting a gentle glow through the large windows. Inside, the mansion breathed a sigh of relief. Richard and Grace spoke quietly of the future, planning carefully to rebuild trust, strengthen family bonds, and ensure nothing like Lola's schemes could happen again. The house, once a battlefield, now become a sanctuary of healing. Beyoncé stepped back to the shadows, satisfied but alert. Her work was complete, but her vigilance never fully rested. She had protected the family, outsmarted deception, and ensured that truth prevailed. Her loyalty, intelligence, and courage had quietly restored order, and that quiet heroism would forever be remembered in the walls of the mansion. The mansion settled into silence. Trust was restored, wounds began to heal, and the family could finally look forward. Richard held his mother's hand, whispering promises of care and protection. And in the corner, a quiet presence watched over them, the unsung hero whose intelligence and courage had turned a house of betrayal into a home of hope. The mansion was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of morning sunlight filtering through frosted windows. Grace, now fully settled in her wheelchair, looked around at the home she had built, the family she had nurtured, and the walls that had witnessed both betrayal and loyalty. A sense of peace filled the room. Her legacy was no longer under threat. Richard stood beside her, gently holding her hand. "Mom, everything is safe. We've protected what you've worked for." His eyes reflected both relief and gratitude. The storm of lies, deceit, and manipulation that had threatened their family was finally behind them. Beyoncé, ever watchful, quietly entered the room, her presence calm and reassuring. Grace smiled at her, gratitude shining in her eyes. "Beyoncé, you saved us," she whispered. The maid's courage, intelligence, and unwavering loyalty had preserved not just wealth or status, but the very heart of the family. Lola had been removed from the household, her schemes fully exposed. The mansion, once a battlefield of hidden plots and whispered strategies, now reflected order, trust, and harmony. Every shadow, every hallway, every corner was free from deception, protected by vigilance, loyalty, and the courage of those who refused to let lies win. Grace took a deep breath, her eyes shining with determination. This house, this family, it's more than wealth. It's trust, love, and legacy. And we will protect it, no matter what comes. Richard nodded, understanding that the true value of inheritance wasn't measured in money. It was measured in loyalty, honesty, and the bonds that withstand even the darkest betrayals. Beyoncé stepped back, a faint smile of satisfaction on her face. She had been the silent guardian, the unseen strategist, and the quiet hero of the story. The mansion's peace was her victory, the family's safety her reward. And in that quiet moment, she realized that true heroism doesn't always need recognition. It leaves its mark in the lives it protects. Outside, the northern lights danced over the snow-covered Alaskan landscape, a vivid reminder that even after the darkest storms, beauty, peace, and hope endure. The family had survived betrayal, reclaimed trust, and secured Grace's legacy. The mansion, once a battlefield, had become a sanctuary, and the story of courage, loyalty, and justice would echo in its halls forever. The battle is over, but the story lives on, and now it's your turn. If you believe in loyalty, courage, and fighting for what's right, share this story, comment on your favorite moment of bravery, and hit subscribe to witness more tales where the unseen heroes always prevail.